Have you ever felt that, no matter how much you explain, no one really heard? The truth is that not all farewells need words. Silence is not escape, it is strategy. It is an act of inner peace, a sign that you understood something that others have not yet seen. We live in a society that requires justifications for everything because we leave a job, end a relationship, or simply move away from someone. But what if the best answer is any? Explain yourself all the time tired, wears out, and often changes nothing. Stoicism teaches us that we should spare energy with what is beyond our control and convince others from our point of view. It is not always worth it. Samuel learned this in the hard way. He tried to shape his garden to please others, but ended up losing his own essence. Instead of fighting to be understood, he chose the silence. And that was the decision that saved his peace. This text is an invitation to reflect on the strength of silence, especially in situations that undermine our emotional energy. If you have already felt that a few words are useless, and sometimes it is best to move on, then keep reading. You can find that silence can be the most powerful answer you have ever given. We often spend time and energy trying to justify our decisions to people who are not interested in understanding them. Explaining yourself may seem like an act of respect, but it is not always necessary. Stoicism teaches us that there is wisdom in accepting that some people simply want to see things like us. And that's fine. Insisting otherwise can be exhaustive and even frustrating. Imagine an actor who decides to leave the scene before the show is over because he realizes that this stage no longer belongs to him. He may try to explain his departure to the public, but most have formed his opinion and cares little about the truth. In many situations of life, we are this actor. Instead of wasting words, we can only leave the scene with dignity and move on. Inner peace must be a priority, and this includes learning to differentiate when speaking is necessary and when silence speaks for itself. It is not about escaping important conversations, but to avoid discussions that lead nowhere. Some people do not want an explanation. They want a debate where the only acceptable answer is the one that confirms their view. Realizing this is liberating. Damning without major discourses is also a form of respect really and with others. If you are sure of your decision, you don't need external approval. The constant need to explain is a trap that keeps us stuck to the validation of others. When you give up on this, you discover the power to simply live your truth without asking permission. The next time you feel you need to justify something you have done for your own well-being, ask yourself, is that really change something? Or just wear out my energy? The answer may surprise. And when you realize that silence can be more powerful than 1,000 explanations, it will begin to experience a new level of freedom. Samuel always liked his garden. He cultivated his plants patiently, chose the seeds carefully, and watched every sprout grow. But one day, visitors began to appear that suggested changes. You should plant roses, they are more beautiful. And how about taking these dry leaves? Your garden needs to be perfect. In the desire to please, Samuel gave way. He changed the plants, pruned what they asked for, and watered as the others thought it was better. Over time, the garden no longer looked like yours. The vibrant colors disappeared. The family aromas were lost. What was once a peace refuge became a strange space, made for others, not to him. Samuel tried to explain that something was wrong, but people only praised how the garden was more beautiful now. He realized that no one really saw what he felt. It was then that Samuel made a decision. Instead of complaining or trying to convince others that he had lost something important, he simply walked away. He stopped taking care of the garden that was no longer yours. Time passed. The plants were withered, the visitors disappeared. And in silence, Samuel found the answer. It was time to start over, this time his way. Without great speeches, without explanations, he drew what was left of that artificial garden and again planting what really made sense to him. And this time, it didn't matter if someone would approve or not. His garden fell again because it was authentic, because he decided to take care of him for himself. Samuel's story is a reflection of life. Often, in an attempt to please others, we lose our essence. And when we realize it, it can be too late. But the good news is that we can always start over. We just need to have the courage to sometimes go out silent and let time do your job. Relationships should be a safe haven, but they often become a rioting sea, full of emotional storms. The problem is that when we are within the situation, we take time to realize that we are drowning. We cling to the hope of change, try to justify bad behaviors, and convince ourselves that the next day will be better. But what if it is not? How long is it worth waiting for something that never comes? Ignoring signs of a toxic relationship does not make it less real. When fights become routine, respect fades and peace gives way to constant anxiety. It is time to face the truth. No one should need to be begged to be treated with love, nor feel that they need to deserve moments of tranquility. If being with someone requires walking on eggs all the time, it may be better to walk away. But getting out of such a relationship can be difficult, mainly because often emotional manipulation is involved. Those who are used to sucking their energy will hardly accept their output without resistance. And that's where silence becomes powerful. Explaining yourself can be a trap, giving the other person a chance to convince him to get a little more once again. It is not necessary a great speech to end something that has already lost its meaning. Instead of long justifications or endless discussions, going out silent can be the strongest and most definitive gesture. Leaving behind a relationship that weighs more than it adds is not selfishness. It is survival. You owe nothing to whom you just made you suffer. If there is valuable advice, this is observe how you feel in the presence of the person. If instead of lightness, he feels deep emotional tiredness, perhaps the answer is already clear. And remember, staying for pity, fear, or custom is not love. It is prison. Many people cling to relationships bankrupt just for fear of being alone. They think that loneliness is a punishment, when in fact it can be a gift. The problem is not in being alone, but what it means to those who do not really know each other. Stoicism teaches that happiness should not depend on external factors, but the way we see ourselves. But what if we are so used to depending on others that we forget who we really are? Staying in a relationship just to avoid loneliness is like keeping a crooked picture on the wall because you don't want to see the empty space. You get used to discomfort and ignore the most obvious solution, remove the board, and accept that the void can also be beautiful. Sometimes loneliness is the breath we need to rebuild ourselves, rediscover our desires, and understand that no company is worth the price of our peace. Society sells us the idea that being alone is a sign of failure. But the real failure is to live unhappy just to fit into an imposed narrative. People who have learned to appreciate their own company never accept less than they deserve, because they know that being alone is better than being badly accompanied. It is not loneliness, it is freedom. And freedom scares those who don't know what to do with her. Leaving a relationship without looking back requires courage, especially when the fear of loneliness whispers no one else will come. But what is worse, to be alone or feel alone with someone? Silence can be a great teacher. When we stop seeking distractions and face our own thoughts, we find answers that were always there, waiting to be heard. If the only reason to stay is the fear of being alone, it may be time to leave. Because in the end, Loneliness is not the absence of someone, but the lack of connection with oneself. And that, yes, is the only loneliness we should fear. Love, when true, must bring lightness, not burden. But how many people live relationships that look more like a chain in their feet? Loving should not be a constant sacrifice, a resistance game where you won those who can handle the most suffering. Healthy love makes you want to stay, not feel that you need to bear. If a relationship is draining more than nourishing, it may not be love, but an undercover attachment. Many people confuse effort with suffering. Every relationship requires dedication, but there is a difference between building something together and carrying everything alone. If only one side is donated, sacrifices itself, and struggles to maintain the connection, it is no longer a relationship, it is an emotional burden. Love should not be a daily battle to be seen, heard, or valued. The weight of a stressful relationship can be silent. It accumulates in small frustrations, in the lack of reciprocity, in the feeling of being alone, even accompanied. When we realize we are exhausted, but still trying to justify the reasons to stay, is it worth it? Is the fear of losing greater than the damage to remain? Getting out of such a relationship may seem cruel, but what is more cruel to leave or get lost within something that no longer makes sense? Silence may be the most sincere answer when words no longer solve. If a love must be constantly explained, begged, or justified, perhaps it has ceased to exist. Love must boost, never imprison. And if it begins to weigh more than free, it's time to rethink if it is worth carrying something that should make you fly. Relationships do not end out of nowhere. They gradually wear out, often for lack of communication. At first, everything flows naturally, but over time, important conversations are avoided, feelings are swallowed, and what was once complicity becomes a field of silent battles. If no one says what they feel, how can the other understand? Silence can be a powerful choice, but when used to avoid necessary dialogues, it becomes a barrier. Many relationships come into a cycle of repetitive discussions, where the same problems arise, the same accusations are made, and nothing changes. Communication is not just to speak, it is to be heard and understood. If the other person is not willing to listen, explaining it can be useless. But before giving up and leaving without looking back, is it worth if you wonder, was there a real attempt at dialogue or just exchange of accusations? Sincere communication requires vulnerability, and not everyone is willing to expose themselves. Sometimes the problem is not a lack of love, but the fear of showing itself in full. However, a relationship where feelings are swallowed and conflicts are swept under the rug is doomed to failure. Accumulating hurts in silence only turns small cracks into insurmountable walls. If even after genuine communication attempts everything is still the same, perhaps the best answer is, yes, silence. Not the one who hides, but the one that ends a cycle of unnecessary wear. When words are no longer enough and understanding seems impossible, leaving without explanations can be the wisest way to move on. A relationship without communication becomes a guessing game where they both lose. Speaking is important, but knowing when to stop speaking and simply departing is also an act of self-love. Intimacy is the soul of any relationship. But contrary to popular belief, it is not limited to physical contact. Intimacy is to laugh at nonsense together, share secrets without fear, feel safe to be vulnerable. When this connection disappears, the relationship becomes only a social contract where two people coexist, but they are no longer true. In the beginning, everything is intense. Unexpected messages, spontaneous touches, looks that speak more than words. Over time, the routine can wear out these gestures if there is no mutual effort to keep them alive. It is not about demanding unbridled passion every day, but of recognizing that when the connection is completely gone, the relationship goes into autopilot. Many couples get used to this silent distance. They lie in the same bed, but sleep in different worlds. They talk, but only about accounts, obligations, and superficialities. The worst mistake is to ignore the signs, pretend it's okay, and continue in this empty dance for fear of change. When the emotional bond dies, the relationship becomes a mere formality. Trying to rekindle the flame can be valid, but if only one side strives while the other accommodates, the result is frustration. Love requires reciprocity. If there is no more curiosity about each other, no desire to strengthen the connection, perhaps it is the time to accept that what existed no longer exists. The absence of intimacy creates a void that, over time, becomes unbearable. If all that remains is the memory of what one day was, it may be better to go silent and preserve respect, instead of prolonging something that has already lost its essence. Relationships are built for two, but just stop caring for everything to crumble. Commitment is not just in words, but in daily actions, in the genuine interest, in the effort to grow together, in the desire to build something solid. When one is dedicated and the other only settles, the imbalance becomes unsustainable. And nothing kills a relationship more than the feeling of rowing alone. Commitment not only means fidelity, but real presence. Being there, emotionally available, willing to face challenges side by side. The problem is that many people confuse being in a relationship with just being there. They follow the routine, but without involvement, without attention to what the other feels. Over time, the absence of commitment is transforming a promising relationship into a loose loop about to undo. No one wants to live in a relationship where it needs to beg for attention or content with crumbs of affection. But many remain this, hoping that the other wakes up to the importance of commitment. The problem is that waiting too much can be expensive. The lack of involvement on one side creates hurts on the other, and when the wear is settled, there is not always a return. Silence may be the most impactful answer in these cases. If there have been dialogues, rescue attempts, and even patience beyond the account, insisting may be a waste of time. Sometimes, the best way to show what commitment matters is to leave without warning, letting the other understand, too late, what you have lost. Relationships do not end with explosive fights, but with small daily dropouts. If one side has given up a long time ago and the other still fights alone, it may be time to accept that keeping just trying to extend the inevitable. Respect is the basis of any relationship. Without it, love becomes toxic, coexistence becomes a minefield, and any conversation can be a war about to explode. Many people tolerate disrespect in the hope that things will improve, but the truth is that when someone gets used to exceeding their limits, it will hardly turn back. What begins with small offenses can become something much bigger. Disrespect not only manifests itself in hard words or aggressive attitudes. Sometimes he hides in indifference, neglect, and lack of consideration. A partner who does not value his opinions, who laughs at his feelings, or who ignores his needs is not only being distracted, is quietly demonstrating that his well-being is not a priority. And that should never be normalized. The problem is that many people try to justify this behavior. They say it's the person's way, it was just a bad moment, that they may be exaggerating. But there is no justification for the lack of respect. If anyone cannot treat you with consideration in the small things, which guarantees that they will do different in the big ones. Tolerate a disrespect today can make room for an even worse tomorrow. When respect is lost, any attempt at dialogue becomes useless. The relationship becomes an emotional cable of war where no one really wins. And trying to explain to someone who no longer sees you admired why your attitudes hurt is a stressful effort. At these times, silence may be the most powerful answer because those who do not respect you hardly understand your words, but you will feel your absence. If a relationship requires you to accept less than you deserve, perhaps the best decision is to leave without explanations. Sometimes the strongest way of saying that it does not accept to be disrespected is simply to leave. Time can transform passion into partnership, and this is natural. But when a relationship enters a cycle of endless repetitions, no growth, without surprises, it is no longer a choice and becomes just a habit. And the monotony, when ignored, can be as destructive as a betrayal or a great fight. The problem is not the routine itself, but when it kills the connection between two people. In the beginning, everything is new, conversations are intense, the meetings are exciting, and the simple fact of being together is enough. But over time, some couples stop feeding this flame. What was once spontaneous becomes mechanical. There is no more curiosity, no desire to surprise. And suddenly a relationship that was once vibrant becomes just a comfortable but lifeless commitment. What's worse is that many settle in this situation. They prefer a warm relationship to face the possibility of a change. But living like this is like watching a repeated movie every day, without excitement, with no expectation. And what was once a refuge turns into an invisible imprisonment. Many couples do not end because they love each other, but because they are afraid of what comes next. Maintaining a living relationship requires effort on both sides. Small gestures can make a difference, an unexpected compliment, an out-of-routine meeting, a deep conversation without distractions. But when only one side tries, while the other only follows the flow, frustration settles. And sometimes the best decision is not to try to rekindle the flame, but to accept that it has already deleted itself. If the relationship has become just a custom, without emotion or growth, staying in it is a mistake. It is not always necessary to discuss or point guilty. In some cases, getting silent is the best way to say, "I deserve more than that." In the end, the decision to leave without explanation is not an act of cowardice, but of wisdom. Not all people deserve their justifications, and not every way needs to be announced. Silence can be a powerful gesture, a definitive answer to those who could not hear their words before. Sometimes we insist on dialogues that lead us nowhere when the most effective answer is simply to leave. Life is too short to get stuck with relationships that wear out, diminish, or run out. If something constantly steals your peace, energy, and essence, it may be time to ask yourself, is it worth continuing? The fear of changing, being alone, or hurting someone can make you postpone the inevitable. But in the end, your greatest responsibility is with yourself. Think about every time you were trying to explain your feelings to those who didn't want to understand. How many repeated discussions, how many frustrated attempts? What if, instead, you simply chose silence and follow your way? This does not mean closing to the world, but learning that some farewells do not need words. What have you tolerated for fear of leaving? What within you already know you need to be closed? Silence may be scary at first, but over time it becomes freedom. And this may be the best decision you have ever made. If this text made sense to you, continue this journey of reflection. Subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, and follow more content that will help you live with more conscience and courage.